In the year 2075, the city of Aurora stood as a beacon of progress and efficiency. Its skyscrapers pierced the clouds, and its streets thrummed with the hum of electric vehicles and automated systems. Aurora was a city designed on the principles of utilitarianism, where the happiness of the majority outweighed the desires of the few. Every decision, every policy, and every action was meticulously calculated to ensure the greatest good for the greatest number. At the heart of Aurora's governance was the Central Committee, a group of highly intelligent and rational individuals who analysed vast amounts of data to guide the city. Their leader, Dr. Emily Hartman, was a renowned ethicist and a staunch advocate of utilitarianism. She believed deeply in the principle that the moral worth of an action is determined by its contribution to overall happiness. Dr. Hartman sat in her office, a sleek, minimalist space overlooking the city. She was reviewing the latest reports on resource allocation and public satisfaction when her assistant Liam entered the room. "Dr. Hartman, we have a situation," Liam said, his voice tinged with urgency. She looked up from her screen, her brow furrowing. "What is it?" "A new disease has emerged in the outer districts. It's highly contagious and lethal. Our initial projections indicate that it could spread rapidly and cause a significant loss of life." Dr. Hartman leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Aurora had faced challenges before, but this was unprecedented. "How many are infected so far?" "Approximately 500, but the numbers are rising exponentially." She stood and walked to the large window, staring out at the city she had dedicated her life to protecting. "We need to contain this immediately. What's the best course of action?" Liam hesitated, then handed her a tablet. "Our medical team suggests a quarantine of the affected districts. It would prevent the spread, but it would also mean isolating tens of thousands of people. There will be a significant impact on their lives and well-being." Dr. Hartman knew the implications. A quarantine would mean cutting off entire communities, disrupting lives, and potentially causing panic. But the alternative was a citywide epidemic that could claim thousands of lives. The calculus of utilitarianism was clear, but the human cost weighed heavily on her. "Prepare the quarantine," she said quietly. "We have to protect the majority, even if it means hardship for the few." Over the next few days, the outer districts were cordoned off. Checkpoints were established, and residents were confined to their homes. Drones patrolled the skies, delivering supplies and monitoring compliance. The city's media channels broadcast messages of reassurance, emphasizing the necessity of the measures and the hope for a swift resolution. Inside the quarantine zone, life was grim. Families were separated, businesses shuttered, and the fear of infection loomed large. Among the residents was a young mother named Anna, who struggled to care for her 2 children amidst the chaos. Her husband, a worker in the central district, was now unreachable, and the isolation gnawed at her spirit. Anna's neighbour, an elderly man named Mr. Dawson, had lived through many trials in his lifetime. He saw the despair in Anna's eyes and tried to offer words of comfort. "We'll get through this," he told her. "The city is doing what it must to keep us safe." But Anna's patience was wearing thin. "How can they justify this? We've done nothing wrong, yet we're the ones suffering." Mr. Dawson sighed, his weathered face reflecting years of wisdom. "Sometimes sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. It may not seem fair, but it's how we ensure the survival of the many." As weeks turned into months, the quarantine remained in place. The infection rate outside the zone stabilized, and the city's medical teams worked tirelessly to develop a vaccine. Inside the quarantine, however, tensions were rising. The residents grew restless, and the strain of isolation began to take its toll. Dr. Hartman visited the edge of the quarantine zone one evening, accompanied by Liam and a few members of the Central Committee. She wanted to see firsthand the impact of their decision. As she looked at the faces of those trapped inside, she felt a pang of guilt. The utilitarian calculus was clear, but the human suffering was undeniable. A group of residents had gathered near the barricades, their expressions a mix of anger and desperation. One man stepped forward, his voice trembling with emotion. "We understand why you did this, but how much longer must we endure? Our lives are being torn apart." Dr. Hartman met his gaze, her heart heavy. "I know this is difficult, but the measures we've taken have saved countless lives. We're working on a solution, and I promise we won't abandon you." That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed the encounter in her mind, questioning her decisions and the principles she had built her life around. The greatest good for the greatest number. It was a noble ideal, but it seemed cold in the face of individual suffering. The breakthrough came 2 months later. The medical team announced they had developed a vaccine that could halt the spread of the disease. The Central Committee immediately began organizing a mass vaccination campaign, prioritizing the quarantine districts. As the vaccines were distributed, the quarantine measures were gradually lifted. Families were reunited, and life slowly returned to normal. The city of Aurora breathed a collective sigh of relief, grateful for the end of the crisis. Dr. Hartman stood on a podium in the central square, addressing the citizens of Aurora. "Today, we celebrate the resilience and strength of our community. We faced an unprecedented challenge and emerged stronger. The decisions we made were difficult, but they were guided by our commitment to the greatest good." The crowd erupted in applause, but Dr. Hartman felt a lingering unease. The principles of utilitarianism had served them well, but she couldn't ignore the personal suffering it had caused. As she looked out at the faces of her fellow citizens, she resolved to find a balance, to honor the greater good while never forgetting the individual lives that composed it. In the end, the city of Aurora continued to thrive, its people united by the shared experience of sacrifice and survival. Dr. Hartman's legacy endured, a testament to the complexity of moral choices and the enduring pursuit of a just and compassionate society.